From sentient sponges to talking animals, and even families financially supporting themselves off of a single salary, cartoons are full of weird and wonderful things that can't possibly exist in the real world. However, the line between fiction and reality isn't as solid as you think, and some cartoon enthusiasts have taken it upon themselves to blur it by creating real versions of the buildings from their favorite cartoons. There are plenty of iconic homes in the world of animation, and today we're going to make your childhood dreams come true by looking at fairy tale cottages, SpongeBob-themed hotel rooms, and Disney-fied digs as I show you around some cartoon houses that you won't believe exist in real life. The Simpsons residence. When it comes to cartoon buildings, no home is more iconic than 742 Evergreen Terrace, the two-story house owned by the loudest, yellowest, and most famous family on television, The Simpsons. Now everyone knows that the Simpsons live in a small town called Springfield. But back in 1997, Pepsi and Fox joined forces with a construction company called Kaufman and Broad to build a real version of the family's iconic house in a different American town, Henderson, Nevada. The house was created as part of a giveaway that aimed to give one lucky fan the chance to own the iconic home, and Kaufman and Broad spared no expense making it identical to the one in the show. Before starting the project, the architects got to kick their feet up and crack open a can of Duff, as they were tasked with watching over 100 episodes of The Simpsons to make the replica as accurate as possible. To think I've been watching The Simpsons for free all these years. What a schmuck. Anyway, all this binge watching paid off, and when the house was finally built, the attention to detail was staggering. Featuring corn-patterned curtains, brightly colored furniture, and over 1,500 themed props scattered throughout the property. In fact, the only real difference between the recreation and the original is the fact that the chimney is fake. After all, Springfield may have battled snowstorms, heat waves, and tornadoes, but the weather in Henderson is a bit more consistent, and you hardly need a roaring fire when you live in a Nevadan desert. Once the house was built, Pepsi released commercials explaining that each purchase of their product would enter the buyer into a raffle for the $150,000 home. In December 1997, the winner of the giveaway was announced as Barbara Howard, a 63-year-old factory worker from Richmond, Kentucky. Pepsi were excited to announce that a winner had been found, but unfortunately, Barbara told them to eat her shorts, opting to take a cash prize of $75,000 instead of moving into the Simpsons house. At this point, the property stood vacant for a few years until 2001, when somebody bought it and removed all the Simpsons memorabilia and decor, turning it into a regular, unremarkable house. Now, I can understand how all that cartoonish decor might be a little headache-inducing after a while, but ay caramba, what a waste! Pepsi, Fox, and Kaufman and Broad put a lot of time, money, and effort into the giveaway, but the event was a resounding failure, proving that nobody actually wants to live in a cartoon world. Though when you see what certain characters would look like in real life, like this creation of Mr. Burns by Nelson Cooper Design Studio, it's probably for the best. There's only one appropriate reaction to that horrific sight. To Bikini Bottom and back. Kaufman and Broad did a great job rebuilding the Simpsons house, but 742 Evergreen Terrace is a pretty standard American home, and some cartoon buildings are harder to create in real life. With that in mind, let's move on to one of the craziest characters and homes in animation, as I ask you the age-old question, who lives in a pineapple under the sea? Yeah, that sponge guy. Now, at first glance, building SpongeBob's Pineapple Palace in real life seems impossible. But if you head to Queensland, Australia, you'll find yourself momentarily transported to Bikini Bottom when you come across a roadside attraction that looks just like Mr. SquarePants' home. The aptly named Big Pineapple is a 52-foot replica of the tropical fruit that was built back in 1971, long before the Sponge Graystar screens. The structure looks just like SpongeBob's house, but unfortunately the giant pineapple is just a sculpture, and all you'll find inside the supersized fruit is stairs to the top of the structure, instead of furniture and a snail named Gary. You can't actually live inside the giant tourist attraction, but fear not, there is a version of SpongeBob's home that's fully habitable. The Pineapple Villa in the Dominican Republic is a luxury version of SpongeBob's home that's officially run by Nickelodeon Hotels and Resorts. On the outside, the villa looks like a futuristic version of a pineapple, but on the inside, it's the spitting image of SpongeBob's home. The villa features all the furniture and decorations you see on the TV show, as well as 2 spacious bedrooms and a private garden with a large pool. Like a pineapple, this hotel suite is pretty damn sweet. But if you want to stay at the 2,300 square foot villa, you're going to have to start working extra shifts at the Krusty Krab, as a visit to the luxury resort will cost you $3,800 a night. Holy! That's a lot of sand dollars. Before we return to the surface, let's stay in Bikini Bottom, checking out another building from the bottom of the sea. If you've ever watched the show, then you'll know that when SpongeBob isn't at home playing with Gary, he's usually at work frying Krabby Patties at the Krusty Krab. SpongeBob's place of work is arguably just as iconic as his house, and in 2014, a group of restaurateurs decided to build a real-life version of the famous restaurant in Ramallah, Palestine. Just like its cartoon counterpart, the restaurant is modeled on a giant wooden crab trap that's decorated with nautical flags and a net on the window. Inside, the restaurant features all the maritime furniture seen in the show, boasting tables made out of ship wheels and counters modeled on rowboats. The nautical-themed menu includes kelp juice, a seafood salad, and, of course, the restaurant's own take on the famous Krabby Patty. They still won't reveal the burger's secret ingredient, though. Sorry, Plankton. SpongeBob's Pineapple and Mr. Krabs' Restaurant aren't the only buildings from Bikini Bottom that have been brought to life. Back in 2020, a Redditor called Venus Marmalade was driving through Palatine Bridge, New York, when they passed this distinctive structure. The bright blue Easter Island head looks pretty out of place in this American field, so it stood out to the Redditor, who immediately identified it as the home of SpongeBob's curmudgeonly neighbor, Squidward Tentacles, whose iconic home has been the subject of many an impressive fan homage over the years. Upon closer inspection to the one spotted in Palatine Bridge, the 15-foot-tall roadside attraction doesn't contain furniture or insulation, so the structure, built by Charlie Nugent, is actually more of a sculpture than a house you can live in. But who wants to break the bad news to the real-life Squidward enthusiasts out there? Not me. Disney Digs. Let's float from the bottom of the sea to the sky as we look at a cartoon house that's known for flying through the clouds. When Pixar's Up was released in 2009, it showed us 2 things. 1, a kid's movie can make a grown man cry in the first 5 minutes. And 2, if you tie around 10,000 balloons to the roof of a house, it can fly into the air. Now, I can vouch for that first fact, but unfortunately, scientists say that the physics behind Up's flying house are a little bit off, and you'd need several million helium balloons to make an average house fly in real life. This disappointing fact means that building Carl's flying house in real life is practically impossible. But that didn't stop the team at Bang Girder's Builders from constructing a ground-bound replica of the home in Harriman, Utah back in 2011. Aside from the lack of balloons, the house is a near-perfect replica of Pixar's home, featuring its multicolored exterior, a hand-painted mural in the living room, and Carl and Ellie's custom letterbox sitting out in the front yard. The house is the ultimate piece of memorabilia, and in 2012, a Pixar fanatic called Lynette Hamblin bought it for $399,000 before moving to Harriman with her family. Lynette has described the home as her dream house, and incredibly, she's managed to turn the property into a money-making opportunity by giving Disney fans paid tours of her home. Over the last 11 years, the Hamlins have hosted a countless number of photo shoots and wedding proposals on their property, safe in the knowledge that if they ever get sick of all the visiting tourists, they can simply attach 10 million balloons to their chimney and fly away to Paradise Falls. A fairy tale cottage. Let's stay on Disney, looking at an iconic building from the first feature-length film they ever made, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. In Disney's 1937 movie, Snow White famously lives in a picturesque cottage with 7 magical dwarfs, spending her days cleaning up after her friends and singing to the local wildlife. When it comes to cartoon houses, you'd be hard-pressed to find one more magical or idyllic than Snow White's woodland home. so it isn't surprising that people have tried to recreate the cottage in real life. Once upon a time in the 1970s, a couple from Olalla, Washington decided to turn their lives into a fairy tale by building a house based on the cottage. The couple spent years constructing the 4-bedroom, 4-bathroom house in the woods, making sure it was the fairest of them all by implementing handcrafted doors, carved wooden beams, and stained glass windows. The house is definitely fit for a princess, and back in 2016 it sold for a princely sum of money as it was placed on the market for the first time at $925,000. With the house's unique design and large garden, that price point isn't much of a surprise. But unfortunately, it means that the chances of us living in this fairy tale home are nothing more than a fantasy. Unless we head down to the mines and find ourselves some diamonds.
Hi ho, hi ho.
Sci-fi living. Despite how it seems, the 1930s weren't all about princesses and magic. A period without Wi-Fi, TV, or handsome, charming YouTubers could be a pretty tricky place to live. So instead, let's travel to the future as we hop in our flying cars and jet off to 2062. For those of you who don't know, The Jetsons is a classic cartoon that follows the lives of a family living in the 2060s. First airing in 1962, each episode follows the Jetsons going about their days in their skypad apartment, a building elevated thousands of feet above the ground. The Jetsons' futuristic house features jetpacks, anti-gravity shoes, and a robot butler. But surprisingly, the sci-fi home was actually inspired by a real building from the 1960s, the Chemosphere in Los Angeles. The Chemosphere might look like a UFO on stilts, but it's actually a modernist house sitting on a 30-foot pole in the Hollywood Hills. The house was built by an aerospace engineer called Leonard Malin in 1960, and since it's established itself as one of the most famous homes in LA, becoming one of the city's official historic cultural monuments in 2004. Despite the Jetsons' futuristic setting, the show first aired just 2 years after the Chemosphere was constructed. For the creators of the show, the newly built Chemosphere's elevated structure and octagonal shape would have felt incredibly futuristic. So it makes sense that they'd use it as an inspiration for the buildings in the show. As a result, the Jetsons' house is far from science fiction. And if you want to live like the family, you don't have to fly into a wormhole and travel to the future. You simply have to get on the I-10, sit through 100 years of traffic, and drive into LA. New Belgium. Let's move even further into the future, jetting off to the faraway year of 3000 and the futuristic city of New York. Futurama is a hilarious sci-fi cartoon about the workers at an interplanetary delivery company called Planet Express. This show is largely set in a sci-fi version of New York containing transportation tubes, flying cars, and a partially buried Empire State Building. In the cartoon, the Planet Express headquarters sits in this futuristic version of the Big Apple. But if you want to visit the iconic cartoon building in real life, you'll have to leave the States and fly to the quaint observatory in Liège, Belgium. The observatory's red walls and green roof closely resemble the Planet Express headquarters, and there are several viral posts online claiming that the creators of the show took inspiration from the Belgian building. Unfortunately, the show's creators haven't confirmed these rumors, and there's no evidence that the similarities between the buildings are anything more than a coincidence. Still, despite being built in 1881, the observatory does share a striking resemblance to the design in the show. Who knows, maybe the building will survive another 1,000 years, get transported to the States, and become home to a certain interplanetary delivery service. Prehistoric pad. I'd say that's about enough time in the future, so let's hop into our time machines and travel back to the present. Wait, no, that's too... damn it. Well, now that we're stuck in the Stone Age, we might as well pay a visit to some cartoon cavemen. The Flintstones is one of the most iconic cartoons of all time, following Fred and Velma's prehistoric lives in a family home made out of stone. Unfortunately, the Flintstones property hasn't technically been recreated in real life, but in 1976, an architect called William Nicholson designed a building that's been affectionately nicknamed the Flintstones House, due to its resemblance to the cartoon home. Originally, Nicholson built a red-bubbled California house in an attempt to experiment with new building techniques and materials. He started by laying wire mesh and steel rebar over giant aeronautical balloons to build the house's shape. before spraying liquid concrete over the design. This process, known as shotcrete, allowed him to construct the home's smooth curving walls quickly and efficiently. At the time, these building techniques were pretty revolutionary, but it didn't stop the house from looking totally prehistoric when complete, earning it its famous nickname. The building truly lets its homeowner live out their wildest caveman fantasies, but if you yabba dabba do want to move into the house, you'll have to start saving some money. The mansion was bought for a whopping $4.2 million in 2015, the new owners paying top dollar for its 2,730 square foot interior and long stretching garden. At that price, the owner's more likely to drive a Rolls Royce than a Flintmobile, but there are less luxurious versions of the Flintstones house out there. The Casa do Penedo is a genuine rock house hidden away in the Foz Mountains in Portugal. The home is a small cottage built between two large boulders. With its simple design and lack of electricity, the home has drawn several comparisons to the Flintstones house. And today, the former residence is a museum dedicated to the house's history, allowing the public to freely walk inside and feel like they've been transported to bedrock. My Neighbor Totoro. We've already looked at some of the most famous cartoons from America, so let's hop on a plane and travel to Japan as we move on to the wonderful world of anime. Studio Ghibli's My Neighbor Totoro is a pretty magical cartoon, following spirits, magic trees, and a cat bus hybrid that transports the characters around. Despite these supernatural and surreal elements, much of the movie takes place in an ordinary wooden house with a red roof and a porch. Since Totoro's release in 1988, its cartoon house has become an iconic part of Japanese pop culture. And in 2005, a replica version of the home was built as part of a World Expo being hosted in Aichi. The World Expo is a recurring international event in which representatives from several countries get together to show off their nation's greatest achievements. Some of the earliest prototype robots, telephones, and televisions have been displayed at World Expositions, and in 1889, the Eiffel Tower was built just to celebrate that year's expo in Paris. All in all, these expositions are a pretty big deal, so when Japan decided to recreate the Totoro house as part of their exhibition, they went to painstaking detail to ensure that the building was identical to the one in the anime. Beyond the matching exterior, the house contains all the furniture and decorations seen in Totoro, including the characters' clothes in the house's wardrobes and messy piles of papers and books in its office. The house was so popular that it became a permanent exhibition when the Aichi Expo ended, making it possible for Studio Ghibli fans to visit it all year round. This decision paid off because 12 years later in 2017, the studio announced that they were building an entire theme park around the house, creating more attractions based on My Neighbor Totoro and other Studio Ghibli movies. Ghibli Park opened in November 2022, marking the first time that a cartoon house has been so successful that it spawned an entire amusement park. Minnie Mouse House. We can't talk about amusement parks without heading to the self-proclaimed happiest place on earth and checking out the cartoon buildings in Disneyland, California. From Cinderella's castle to the Haunted Mansion, Disney's parks contain so many iconic buildings that it's hard to single one out. However, one of the best examples of the park's recreation of cartoon buildings is their version of a house belonging to Minnie Mouse. As the faces of Disney's billion-dollar empire, I'm sure Mickey and Minnie Mouse own a lot of property. The power couple have been shown to occupy castles, a nightclub, and a talking house in Disney's cartoons, and one of the many homes owned by the pair is Minnie's country house. This pink and purple property has appeared in a few cartoons over the years, including Mickey Mouse Works and a 2001 PC game called Mickey Saves the Day 3D Adventure. With its bright colors, sloping angles, and love heart decorations, Minnie's house is pretty cartoony, but incredibly, it's been painstakingly recreated in Disneyland. Outside, this house perfectly matches the animated original, and when you enter the home, you're greeted with a fridge stocked with cheese and pictures of Minnie's family. The living room is even littered with open books and half-read magazines, and books including the Cosmousepolitan and Little Mouse on the Prairie. So not only can this mouse read, she also has her own home. Show off. Hobbit Hole. Now, Minnie Mouse's replica house is pretty awesome, but unfortunately, all the food in the refrigerator is made out of plastic, and if you try to actually move into the property, Disney's security will probably kick you out of the park. Luckily, there are some cartoon houses that are completely habitable, allowing you to truly live like your favorite animated characters. Now, when I say Lord of the Rings, most of you probably picture Orlando Bloom and elf ears, or possibly Ian McKellen's iconic Gandalf. However, J.R.R. Tolkien's iconic book was actually first adapted as a set of animated films, with 4 different cartoons based on Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, appearing between 1966 and 1980. These movies contain all the key elements of the story, featuring animated versions of Gandalf's beard, Frodo's feet, and of course, the famous Hobbit houses. The hillside houses in Hobbiton are one of the most iconic parts of the Lord of the Rings, and now you can find these homes outside of the Shire as fans of the franchise build similar dwellings in real life. In 2009, a photographer called Simon Dale built his very own Hobbit house by hand, using a hammer, a chainsaw, and some help from his father-in-law. The house took 4 months and $7,500 to complete, but once it was done, Simon had his very own Hobbiton home, featuring curved walls, wooden beams, and a grass roof. If DIY isn't your thing, then you can just catch a flight to New Zealand and visit Hobbiton for real by taking a guided tour of the Lord of the Rings movie set. The tour will allow you to see the real Hobbit holes up close, and you can even grab a pint of ale at the Green Dragon pub, spending the day like a real authentic Hobbit. I hope they serve 11sies and salted pork.
Salted pork.
Hello Kitty house. Let's move from the swords and sorcery of Middle-earth to something a bit less intense. Hello Kitty is one of the most successful animated characters of all time, appearing in cartoons, video games, and on every accessory imaginable. In some parts of the world, it's impossible to go 5 minutes without locking eyes with the famous feline. And since her creation in 1974, the character has amassed a huge fan base. Now don't get me wrong, I love my Hello Kitty pajama set more than life itself, but no Hello Kitty fan supports the cartoon cat more than the owner of this house in Hsinchu, Taiwan. The house is full of Hello Kitty themed furniture, including pink couches, custom wallpaper, and a Hello Kitty shaped trellis outside. The home's bright pink exterior looks very similar to Hello Kitty's house in the 2020 web series Hello Kitty and Friends Super Cute Adventures. Interestingly, that series was made long after the house was built, so who knows? Maybe the Megafans house actually inspired the creators of the show. Just don't tell the Megafan, they might just explode. A Malibu mansion. If all that pink decor is giving you a headache, then you're in trouble, because we're about to move on to a house owned by the pinkest, most plastic character of all time. No, not Paris Hilton. Barbie. Barbie may have started out as a simple doll, but today the brand is much more than a pretty face, growing into a billion-dollar franchise that spawned cartoons, video games, and live-action movies. Since her creation in 1959, generations of little girls have dreamt of visiting Barbie's Malibu mansion, and back in 2013 they got the chance with the opening of Barbie's Dreamhouse Experience in Berlin, Germany. The Dreamhouse Experience was a life-size replica of a dollhouse that acted as a themed exhibit for all things Barbie. On the outside, the house was a 2,500 square foot mansion featuring bright pink walls and a high heel statue in the middle of the driveway. Inside, the experience became even more Barbie-fied as it allowed visitors to search through Barbie's wardrobe, bake cupcakes in her kitchen, and even take a look in her bedazzled bathroom. With its array of decorations and furniture, the Dreamhouse truly felt like a window into Barbie's home, and the experience also contained exhibitions and displays of Barbie memorabilia and dolls. Unfortunately, life in plastic wasn't all that fantastic, and the Barbie Dreamhouse Experience closed back in August 2013, crushing the dreams of a million kids across the globe. On the bright side, its closure didn't stop one fan from living out his wildest Barbie fantasies by building his own version of Barbie's beach house. This Malibu mansion was built by interior designer Jonathan Adler to celebrate Barbie's 50th birthday in 2009. From a distance, the house looks like a regular Californian mansion, but when you get up close, the Barbie-branded decor makes it clear that this house could only belong to a Barbie girl living in a Barbie world. World's largest doghouse. Let's stay in the sun, moving from Malibu to a land down under, as we check out a cartoon house in Australia. When most of us think of Australia, we picture a mystical upside-down land where spiders and snakes lurk on every sun-beaten corner. However, Australia isn't all scary, and the nation is actually home to one of the friendliest cartoon characters of all time, Bluey. For those of you who don't know, Bluey is a cartoon about a young blue heeler puppy who lives in Brisbane with her family. The cartoon was initially targeted at Australian kids aged 5 to 7, but since its release in 2018, it's become one of Australia's most successful cultural exports, kicking Crocodile Dundee off his throne by winning an International Emmy in 2020. Bluey has won the Australian Film Institute's award for Best Kids Show every year since its release, and it's also become one of the most streamed shows on Disney+. With these accolades, it's fair to say that the show has a lot of fans, and in February 2022, they got the opportunity to physically step into Bluey's world as her house in Brisbane became available to rent on Airbnb. BBC Studios and Airbnb joined forces to build the house as a promotion for Bluey, installing colorful bedrooms, a cartoony playroom, and a custom stained glass window to recreate the world's largest doghouse. The rooms were decorated with all the Heeler family's possessions, and the decorators even placed a freshly baked duck cake in the kitchen, based off a dessert that Bluey's dad baked in an episode. The cartoon house was part of a promotional competition that would allow one lucky family to spend a weekend there. A maximum of 2 adults and 2 children could enjoy the stay, but ironically, they weren't allowed to bring any pets, forced to leave their blue heeler puppies at home. Unfortunately, it isn't clear which lucky family won the raffle, but I'm sure the house's decorations and furniture blew the kids' minds. Millennium Falcon. So far, we've looked at pineapples, observatories, and giant dollhouses, but not all homes are stationary buildings, and some famous characters live in more mobile dwellings. When it comes to fictional vehicles, you'll be hard-pressed to find one more iconic than Han Solo's famous starship, the Millennium Falcon. The Falcon is one of the most iconic parts of the Star Wars franchise, and although it isn't strictly a house, Han and Chewie definitely spend a lot of time crashing in the vehicle's sleeping quarters while traveling across the galaxy, so I'm willing to make an exception to the rule. Outside of the original Star Wars movies, the Falcon has appeared in theme parks, video games, and several cartoons, including the Star Wars Forces of Destiny series and the Lego Movie. There have been lots of different incarnations of the Falcon since the 70s, and a short time ago in the galaxy we all live in, a designer called Charles Wright created a new version of the spaceship, a 4-bedroom mansion in Queensland, Australia. Now, the designer insists similarities between the house's design and the Falcon are purely coincidental. However, it's hard to deny the house's gray angular exterior does closely resemble the starship. Inside the house is a little bit roomier than Han and Chewie's digs, featuring large bedrooms, an outdoor kitchen, and a plunge pool. When the mansion was listed for sale in 2015, Star Wars fans jumped at the opportunity to live inside a house that looked like the famous starship. Unfortunately, it soon became clear that their chances of buying the property were pretty slim after the house sold for a stratospheric $15 million. That's a pretty steep price for a house, even if it does look like the Millennium Falcon. I mean, come on, it can't even fly. With that, it's time to head back to our regular boring houses and end our tour of cartoon homes that exist in real life. If you had the choice, which one of these insane homes would you live in? Let me know in the comments down below, and thanks for watching.